Good morning. I think we just have one in here right now. And Anne, I have had a crazy week, so I still need to get back in touch with you about a time to talk, and I'm sorry is not materialized this week. So I still want to be able to talk to you. I had some medical things going on. Good morning. Hello, hello. Yeah, I think everybody's coming in now. There we go. Okay. Good morning, Marty. Hi, Laura. Got Ann here. May still be waiting on Bonnie and Kathy. I'm not sure if they'll end up coming in or not, but I was going to go ahead and start off. I've got something kind of fun to show you all in a second and see if you've ever tried this before. I think we're still all getting situated though. Hello. Let's see. Okay. Well, I'm going to turn you all off of mute for a second. And just so we can all hear each other, as long as we don't have too much feedback. There we go. Let's see, I'm still working on this one. Okay. Yeah, okay. So let's see. Good morning, Bonnie.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hello. I was going to show you a few things that I did this week that were a little bit unusual. Let's see. You know, I may have to mute us. If you want to talk, let me know. And you can just push the space bar. I think we're getting a little bit of feedback here. So let's see. Okay. So this week I bought plantains. Has anyone ever cooked plantains before? They look like a big banana, but I have never bought them. I've eaten them other places. One time I ate them in Venezuela when I was there, and then another time I ate them at a place in downtown Nashville at a Mexican restaurant, and they were kind of lightly fried and they tasted like donuts. But plantains are another great source of fiber, of prebiotic fiber. And I'm thinking I'm just going to slice this in half and kind of just lightly pan fry it with a tiny bit of coconut oil. You're supposed to wait for plantains to get pretty dark. So this one, it looks like it would be a good banana, but I think it needs to be a little bit darker to eat a plantain. So I'm just going to play with this one because I was trying to find some different produce for myself this week. But I will tell you one thing that I do enjoy. If you go to a grocery store that only has the really green bananas and you think, well, goodness, I'm going to have to wait forever for those to ripen. You can buy those green bananas and you can slice them either in little rounds or you can slice it vertically or across, so lengthwise. And you can pan fry those with a tiny bit of coconut oil or avocado oil, olive oil, sprinkle with a little bit of salt if you want it more of a savory taste, or a tiny bit of cinnamon and sugar makes a really nice, kind of a little bit sweet treat, but not too sweet. It's something I just discovered when Aldi only had green bananas, but I've really liked it. And you just barely, about medium heat, barely cook it till it's a tiny bit brown on both sides. So that's a different way to use bananas, or if you buy plantains. And bananas are they're a great source of that prebiotic fiber that we talked about this week. So I've got one more thing to show you, and then I didn't necessarily have any questions come in, but I think you all may have some. So we'll jump in a second. But I also bought, for the second or third time this week, I bought some leeks. Do you all cook with leeks? Okay, Marty and Gail do. I had never really cooked with them before. So Gail, when you cook with them, do you use the green parts here as well? No? Okay. I've been reading recipes that you only are supposed to use, well, you usually only use the white and the light green parts. And I thought, well, I don't want to throw those away. That's a lot of green. But I did read a recipe that if you slice the leeks and kind of saute them with the cover on the pan and let them cook down for a long time, that those green parts will soften up as well. So I did that this week and they were good. So that way I didn't waste everything. But it's just, leeks have a much milder taste than onions do, or scallions. My children thought they tasted a little bit like cabbage. So there's a little bit of that sulfur taste, but not as strong as an onion. So I have a soup recipe that I really like that has some leeks in it, but you can use it any place that you would want to use onions. If you, you do want to make sure that I go ahead and slice the end off of these, and then I really rinse them in water. They can have a good bit of grit that gets in them from growing. Somehow they just get stuck in there. So I just rinse it out in water really well and drain it and then rinse it again. But they're not hard. They're not as hard to get into as an onion. Sometimes an onion's so big to cut into. Leeks are more just set it down on the cutting board and just slice slices. So that's just a different thing to consider. Sometimes it's nice to change things up a little bit. And those leeks do have good prebiotic fiber in there as well. So now I've got leek dirt all over me now. Okay. Well, based upon our either discussion on or presentation on Monday, or things that came up on Wednesday, or maybe other days of the week, is there anything that anybody wants to jump in and questions you want to start with to begin? Okay, Bonnie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Let you chat. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm here to advertise, to do a favorable advertisement for the brownie batter.
Oh,
Man, that stuff is really good. We were just on the phone with our son from California, and their son just graduated from culinary school. So they are, and our son is a big barbecuer. So he cures his own bacon and he makes his own sausage. And then between him and Elijah, who's just finished culinary school, they are eating up a storm. So they're big foodies. So I told them about the brownie batter recipe. He said, send the recipe, because we're all chocoholics. You know, we've got to have 70% chocolate. But I had some yesterday, and I didn't have to have any of my chocolate bar.
wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
great.
anyway, good recipe. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for sharing. If it passes the culinary test, then we're really doing good.
Yeah, right.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, and then in some ways they'll eat anything. They've got 2 boys.
Boys will. I'm curious, did you make any changes? Did you use a different type of nut butter or cocoa versus cacao?
I used cocoa.
Okay.
That's what I had here, and I did use almond butter.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't make any other changes.
Okay.
Oh, yes, I did. So then I decided it needed a little bit more oomph, so I brewed up. We have a 1 cup Keurig thing. My husband drinks decaf. I drink decaf. He drinks regular. Anyway, he drinks Pike Place Starbucks, which is pretty strong. So I made it strong and used a tablespoon of that to thin it down, and it did add a little depth to the chocolate.
Ooh, that's a great variation on it. There you
Right.
go.
Now I'm thinking about possibly stirring in just a few chocolate chips.
Yes. When I bring that dish places, I usually garnish it with some like Enjoy Life chocolate chips, so people know what it is. So they think, oh, chocolate versus what's this brown stuff?
Yeah, right.
I usually label it too, so they're like, oh, that's what it is. So
Yeah. So do you call it brownie batter when you take it?
I do. I write brownie batter hummus.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm glad to know you've tried it. That's good.
Yeah, and I used Great Northern beans.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, beans are such a nice, versatile thing to keep on hand. They're just such a quick and easy food, and I know it's one of my fast food staples for sure. So, I've also made a cinnamon roll version of that hummus. So instead of chocolate, I've put some cinnamon and sugar. Some people end up liking that if they are not big. Some people I know aren't chocolate fans. Imagine that, but they do like the kind of cinnamon taste. So yeah, there's lots of things you can do with dessert hummus. Okay. Anybody else with questions or comments or thoughts? Okay, Marty.
Okay, so on the Monday, you talked about a mouse model study in 2017,
Yes,
and that was on mice, right? Or it
correct.
wasn't just the name of the doctor or something, I thought. But so is that any of that been done on with humans or?
Great question. I have not come across one that has. I did not trace that to its depths. So I will need to pull that up and look and see. It seems like it's so recent, I don't know if they've repeated it, but I thought it was a very good study that needs to be repeated for sure in humans, but
Well, to me, the thing that I was attracted by it is I noticed when I'm doing rock steady boxing, if they speed up the tempo or it's a particularly cognitive uh, challenging, I
mhm.
have difficulty with that. And that thing said there were, both movement and cognitive benefits.
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
that would be, let me look into that one. Maybe by Monday I'll have some answers to see how to trace it. But the reference is there if anybody likes to go dig on their own in PubMed. It's on the end of in the references section of the slides. But I can send a snippet of that out as well if you like to do reading.
No, I see the references there. Okay.
Okay, it's at one of the very last slides of the slide deck. And if it's too small of print, let me know too. I'll try to send that out after our class. I'll send a link to that particular study. I think what I like about that so much is they're finally realizing it's not just one thing. There's not one magic bullet. It's so much of a combination. And like the rock steady boxing you mentioned, we have to have movement combined with foods, combined with maybe some additional nutrients that we need. It's so many things together. And I'm glad they're finally taking that into consideration. Right. So, hi, Ann, we can see you now. Okay. Sometimes Ann's internet, she lives in a wonderful place, but the internet's not quite as strong, so sometimes we don't get to see her here. So, okay. Anybody else? Oh, okay, yes.
I got another one. You talked about not taking fiber at the same time as prescription meds because it might affect the absorption. So like how much time should you separate between?
That's a good question. It may depend a little bit upon the prescription medication. It's particularly if it's a delayed release one versus if it's something that's more immediate. Usually I like to separate things out at least by an hour to 2 hours. Now, if you're taking something kind of every few hours throughout the day, I know that it makes it kind of difficult. And if you've already been doing something, I wouldn't necessarily say change it, but it's just a consideration if you add something in new. It may be even something to discuss with the pharmacist to say, how long is this medication in my system? They may know a little bit more about how long the half-life is, the peak of when it stops acting and starts decreasing a little bit more. But I usually say about 1 to 2 hours in there is a good amount of time. Especially if you're taking your medicine a little bit more on an empty stomach and then food comes afterwards, that can be helpful. And not every prescription medication is going to be affected, I don't think, but there are certain ones that certainly would be. Even some vitamins and minerals that I have people take, I don't want to take at the same time as a lot of fiber. So.
I got one more.
Okay, good.
So the links you send us and for the slides and the videos and all that, I mean, will that be something we can go back and review after we're finished meeting, or how long will those be available to?
Yes, I have those set to be available for 6 more weeks after we finish, so a total of 12 weeks.
Okay.
So you can download whatever you want to, and I may make it available indefinitely. I just know that sometimes information expires or there's new information, and so I will still be in touch if something changes beyond that. And sometimes people need a little bit of incentive to go ahead and take advantage of it versus something always being there. So that's why I kept it at the 6 weeks after we finish. But I'll probably send you a reminder. And if there's something that you say, I know you talked about that and I can't find it anymore, just let me know. And I'll send it to you. I won't withhold it. But that's what I've decided just for right now, in case something changes from how I host the platform. But I know at least one individual had trouble accessing the link with the materials. Like it's hard from like password and that kind of thing. And I'm still looking into that. I can't reset passwords from my end. I know that the platform has really good technical support, but I'm going to reach out to them and see if there's anything they suggest. I just haven't had a chance to do that yet. But any materials that I've been trying to put all materials in one place, but I know technology can be a problem sometimes. So just, yeah, it's hard to maneuver that one, especially when there's a sign-in procedure. So I'm still working on that one. I'm going to make myself a note, actually. Okay. Great questions. Anybody else? Something from the week or something that you just thought of? I can't hear you, Anne. I'm sorry. There's a chat function down here. If you, I'm writing a box. If you want to add a question, you can put it in the chat box if that comes up for you, if that's easier. Okay. Let's see. Well, I'd love to hear, is there any way is anyone finding great ways to incorporate fiber into their day-to-day life that they already works for you very well? Some tips and tricks that you want to share? Or maybe foods that you've been eating that you just realized, oh, well, I didn't know that was a good source of prebiotics. That's great. It's difficult for us as Americans, particularly when so many of our grains are polished and made pretty, and our breads are made fluffy and white, and we take a lot of the fiber out of things, or have things that are already so processed, like even some of our vegetables, things like that we just don't have as much fiber that we get in. And a lot of people say, I don't know how I'm going to get that much fiber in every day. So it can be a challenge, and it's not something that you want to start. You probably don't want to increase your fiber to your goal tomorrow if you're not already there. It's something that I would certainly work on doing slowly, maybe a little bit every week, kind of like when we talked about water. You don't want to start drinking your goal of water tomorrow. The same thing with fiber. We did talk about water first before we talked about fiber, so we don't ever want to increase fiber without having a good amount of water, because that can really be a problem too. But sometimes even starting to feed some of that good bacteria in our system, our body can start to kind of have to readjust a little bit. If we start feeding the good guys, sometimes there's a little bit of, people feel maybe a tiny bit more bloated or a little bit more gassy because their body's just kind of shifting a little bit. So it's something to keep in mind. It's okay to take it slow to get to your goal. I'm going to get some water, excuse me. I was talking about that. Excuse me. Another great thing about we talked about leeks already today, but things like those onions and leeks, they have that sulfur compound smell, so that I call them the stinky vegetables, the things that don't smell so great when we cook them necessarily, but those sulfur bonds in there can be very helpful for our body as we're detoxifying and getting rid of those environmental toxins, or sometimes even byproducts of medications or pesticides in the food. Our body needs that sulfur to help get rid of it. Particularly like in onions and leeks, there's a compound called NAC, which stands for N-acetylcysteine. And we'll talk more about that next week. I'm going to go into depth with vitamins and minerals particularly. But that NAC is that precursor. It's the building block to our really big antioxidant called glutathione, which we have seen some, I've kind of mentioned it off and on throughout our class, that we don't keep it around in our body very long, but it's what we really need to help our body detoxify. There have been some incidental case reports for people with Parkinson's using some glutathione. I don't think it sticks around in the body very long. So that's why I like to make sure we have the building blocks that we need instead of like the end product, because that end product just doesn't stay. But that NAC, vitamin C, selenium, our body can use those things to help build that glutathione. So getting that in from a food supply is a very nice thing if you're typically eating that. And sometimes we need a little bit extra building blocks, and that's where I sometimes would bring in supplemental NAC for people, or if we do a nutrient test and selenium or vitamin C is particularly low, might need to boost those levels up a little bit. But when we start with food, that's a really great place to start in getting that regularly. Excuse me, I just have a little frog in my throat this morning. Bonnie, yes, and then Bonnie and then Laura. Here, I'm going to unmute you first.
Okay. I go in a couple of weeks for my annual physical, and my doctor orders blood work ahead of time. Is there anything I need to tell her to put on the blood work or whatever? How does that work?
Right. Okay. Let me let Ann know we can see you. Okay, we can see Ann. We just can't hear Ann. So for the blood work, basic things that doctors can do, I probably need to give you a list, but I'm going to tell you right now just in case I don't get it out in time. If you're wanting to investigate basic information, you certainly want to make sure they measure vitamin D labs. Usually there's only one form that they're going to draw, but it's called your vitamin D 25-OH. That's your vitamin D25 hydroxy. There's a strong correlation even between that. We're seeing some studies that have come out recently, and susceptibility to COVID infection. So that's a basic information, and we know that vitamin D relates to Parkinson. So good information to have. The other thing, if you haven't had your labs investigated for your blood sugar levels, I like to make sure, along with fasting glucose, that we have a hemoglobin H1C. Sometimes that's abbreviated HgA1C. That's the 3-month average of blood sugar that we kind of talked about. We don't really know how high it goes or how low, which is the average. And I know some of you who are medical professionals know that one. But then also fasting insulin. And that's not one that's often added on there. Fasting insulin.
Okay.
That's kind of sometimes a sign to us before anything else goes off that our body's not managing blood sugar well. Trying to think what other things the doctors were going to be measuring. One thing that may be helpful is to get I'm going to give you the abbreviation, HS-CRP. That's a high sensitivity C-reactive protein. That's one measure that can kind of tell us, do we have a lot of inflammation going on in the body? It doesn't always tell us that there's inflammation, but if it is high, then we'll know. A lot of times the cutoff for that is 3.0 for that high sensitivity marker, but I like to see it below 1. Anybody in the 2 to 3 range, and I'm already starting to worry, it can be as low as 0, and that's fine. One other marker that may be helpful for you, and this has to do with more heart, but it also can help us see if there's some B vitamins that are off sometimes, is the homocysteine. That's HOMOCYSTEINE. And we see that is correlated with cardiac conditions often. But I also know that if that level is high, there's some nutrients, particularly our B vitamins, that can be lower than they should be. And we know there's a correlation between B vitamins and Parkinson's, and we'll talk about that next week. But particularly like neurological function and our B vitamins. Homocysteine can also be elevated when in connection with osteoporosis. So it's kind of a different way than when we see some of those nutrient correlations. Let me think about something else. Does anybody else have any labs that they particularly know they like to have their doctors draw that you don't necessarily have, that aren't necessarily on the normal list? Those are the ones that I know that doctors will typically draw for someone that, and they don't have any problem with, or usually don't have any problem with doing it. A lot of the labs that I use are what we call functional labs. They don't diagnose anything, but they help us to see a more in-depth level. And they're ones that, if you work with an integrative and functional doctor, they may run these labs. If you work with just more of a traditional medical model, they're not going to know. They don't order them. They're not a member of the lab, or they don't have an account with the lab, I guess you should say. And then they really don't know what to necessarily do with them if they do get the information. But those are some of the basic nutrition labs that you can have drawn that may be helpful. Also, if you've had any history of thyroid disease, particularly Hashimoto's, and if you don't have your antibodies checked regularly, that is a good thing to ask for your Hashimoto's antibodies, along with your free T3 and your free T4. Typically doctors run the TSH, but I like to have that free T3 and T4 as well. And that just kind of helps us to see, is there something else going that's flaring in the body that maybe we don't know about? You can have a doctor draw a B12 level. Well, we'll talk about this more next week. I will say that typically if doctors draw a B12 in the office, it really does not give me a full picture of if your B12 levels are really low or if they're adequate. I've seen a lot of, sometimes people have that blood level drawn. It's more indicative of what you've just eaten in the past few days, and it's not really what's getting inside of your cells. But if it is really, really low, and like I'd say if it's below 300 to 400, now I usually know, okay, we need to pull in some vitamin B12 supplementation. And it may not necessarily be marked on the doctor's lab report as being low at that level. But if it's at that level, especially if it's lower, we'll know, okay, there's something going on with the B12 levels. And B12 really affects our neurological function. There have been some cases where people have been misdiagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and it was actually B12, significant B12 deficiency. And I'm not saying that that's something that's common, but I'm just, that there's a close relationship between memory, cognition, nerve function, and B12 deficiency. So sometimes that's something that can sneak in, especially as we get older and our stomach acid decreases, we don't absorb B12 as well. It's common for older adults to be deficient in B12. And that might be one thing that's putting a stress on your body that we just need to bring that up with a little bit of natural supplementation. And it doesn't take much to correct that B12 deficiency. That can also affect sleep. So, and our even like constipation and things like that, B12 deficiency is involved in so much that sometimes even our sleeping is affected when we're B12 deficient. So. I've found when I run lab reports for my clients on nutrient levels, I have a very specific nutrient panel that tests about 35 different nutrients. And we check to see like what's actually getting inside of the cells. And often the B12 in the cellular level is a lot lower than what is just in the bloodstream. When we kind of compare, if we have those two values to compare, it really gives us more in-depth information to know where to go. So. Good questions. Is that kind of cover, Bonnie, what we had talked about? Okay. I think that's what doctors will usually be able to get. And then if they're a more natural doctor, they may have some other things they want to run particularly for you. If you've ever been suspected that you have iron deficiency anemia, one of the other labs I like to have drawn is a ferritin level. Ferritin is it's an iron storage hormone. I get that along with a full iron panel. Sometimes I evaluate that for clients as well. I know it's not as typical for women who are not still menstruating to be lower in iron, but sometimes it can happen if you've been chronically low in iron for a long time and that's not something that's ever been evaluated. Or if you've had a little bit of like a GI bleed, sometimes I'd see, if you've been losing a little bit of blood in your stool silently, it could be that your body's kind of missing out on some iron in there. So it's one thing that I look at for clients sometimes to make sure we're at a good level of that one. Let's see. Well, as I mentioned, next week we'll be talking more about vitamins and minerals, particularly because I think it's good to kind of draw those out and show some studies and things like that. But I don't necessarily have anything quite in mind yet for our cooking and recipes. So if you have specific things that you think I would love to explore a little bit more about this type of food or cooking, I'm going to kind of leave that as a grab bag Wednesday. So I'll be taking any requests that you have for cooking. So we'll make a recipe. We'll probably try to make 2 recipes on Wednesday, and I'll send out some other ones for you to try. And then we'll wrap it up next Friday. Y'all stuck with me to the end. Technology failures, broken glass, my own foggy brain and everything. So I really appreciate that. It's good to see your faces every week, and I've enjoyed our time together. So if you think of any questions over the weekend, please let me know. Happy to chime in there, and then I'll see you on Monday. Okay, have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.